25 experts failed, but only the poor delivery girl solved it in 30 seconds. What the Korean Mafia boss did next shocked everyone. The rain fell mercilessly over Seoul that night, turning the streets into mirrors that reflected the neon lights of a city that never truly sleeps. Inside the gleaming Park Tower on the 50th floor, 25 of the most brilliant minds in cybersecurity had been locked in a conference room for 7 straight days. 25 experts with degrees from Seoul National University, MIT, and Stanford. 25 people who commanded salaries that most Koreans could only dream of. 25 failures. The digital vault they were trying to break into contained evidence that could destroy the Park crime syndicate from the inside out. Evidence of bribes, murders, and political corruption going back 3 generations. The police had seized the encrypted hard drive during a raid, but the encryption was unlike anything they had ever seen. So they brought in the best of the best. Cybersecurity experts, cryptographers, former hackers now working for the government. For 7 days, they had stared at screens until their eyes burned, fueled by energy drinks and desperation. For 7 days, they had accomplished nothing. The conference room had become a graveyard of crushed coffee cups, abandoned notepads filled with useless equations, and broken spirits. The air reeked of failure and frustration. These were people unaccustomed to not getting what they wanted. People who believed their intelligence made them superior. People who would soon be humbled by a girl they wouldn't even look at on the street. 2:37 a.m. When most of the experts had either fallen asleep at their stations or were staring blankly at the wall, the door opened. Min-ji Park stepped into the room, soaking wet from the rain, her cheap delivery uniform clinging to her thin frame, a plastic bag of steaming jjajangmyeon noodles clutched in her trembling hands. She was nobody. A 24-year-old dropout who spent 18 hours a day on a scooter, racing through dangerous streets to deliver food to people who didn't even look her in the eye when they took their orders. A girl who lived in a one-room apartment with a grandmother slowly dying of cancer. A ghost in her own city. Delivery, she announced, her voice barely audible over the hum of the computers. Nobody even bothered to look up except for the team leader, who waved her toward the back of the room where the order had been placed. As Min-ji navigated through the maze of desks, her eyes drifted to the massive screen at the front of the room. Something clicked in her mind. Pattern. A sequence. A memory from her past life, when she had been at the top of her computer science class before life crushed her dreams beneath its boot. She paused, the noodles forgotten in her hands, and stared at the screen. Then, without thinking, still clutching her delivery bag, she stepped forward and typed 3 lines of code into the nearest keyboard. Just like that. 30 seconds. That's all it took. The screen flashed green. The vault unlocked. The room fell silent. Min-ji stood there, her wet shoes creating a puddle on the expensive carpet, completely unaware that in the shadows behind her, watching her every move with cold, calculating eyes, was Hyun-woo Park himself, the heir to the Park Syndicate, the most feared man in Seoul. A man who had ordered more deaths than most soldiers see in war. A man whose face had never been photographed, whose voice struck terror into the hearts of powerful men. Before we continue this incredible story, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from tonight. Are you Team Min-ji already? If the story of an underestimated delivery girl touches your heart, smash that like button right now. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on because stories like this one deserve to be shared, and we bring new ones every week. Hyun-woo Park stepped out of the shadows, his designer shoes making no sound on the plush carpet. The experts, finally realizing what had happened, turned to stare at the dripping wet delivery girl standing in front of an unlocked vault that had defeated them for a week. Who gave you permission to touch that computer? Hyun-woo asked, his voice like ice sliding over steel. There was no question mark at the end because it wasn't really a question. It was an accusation, a threat, a promise of consequences. Min-ji spun around, the bag of noodles slipping from her grasp and crashing to the floor, spilling dark sauce across the pristine white carpet. She stood frozen, her eyes widening as she looked into the face of the man whose family had terrorized Seoul for generations. Her heart hammered in her chest, each beat telling her she was going to die. Right here, right now, for something she didn't even understand. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I was just delivering food." I saw the pattern and it reminded me of something I studied once. Hyunwoo's eyes narrowed, cold and calculating as he assessed the trembling girl in front of him. "What did you study?" he asked, his tone still devoid of emotion. Minji swallowed hard, knowing that her next words might determine whether she lived or died. "Computer science. At Seoul National. I was on scholarship before I had to drop out." The room remained deathly silent. No one moved. No one spoke. The experts watched in horror, expecting to see blood spilled at any moment. This was Hyunwoo Park, after all. The man who had once had an entire restaurant burned to the ground because his coffee was served lukewarm. But instead of calling for her death, Hyunwoo did something no one expected. He pulled out his phone, pressed a single button, and spoke 3 words, "Kim, come up." Less than 2 minutes later, a tall man with a scarred face entered the room. Kim Ji-hoon, Hyunwoo's right hand. The executioner. The man whose hands had ended more lives than anyone dared to count. "Check what she did," Hyunwoo ordered, gesturing toward the computer. Kim sat down, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he verified that the vault was indeed open, that the encryption had been broken, that this soaking wet delivery girl had accomplished in 30 seconds what 25 experts couldn't do in 7 days. Kim looked up, and for the first time in years, genuine shock registered on his face. "She broke it," he said, his voice rough with disbelief. "The pattern recognition sequence she used. It's brilliant, so simple yet so effective. She saw what everyone else missed." Hyunwoo turned his gaze back to Minji, who stood shivering in her wet clothes, looking smaller and more vulnerable by the second. But there was something in her eyes, a defiance, a strength that refused to be extinguished even in the face of terror. It intrigued him. "Who are you?" he asked softly, dangerously. Minji lifted her chin slightly, her voice steadier than she felt. "My name is Minji Park. I'm a delivery rider for Quick Bites. I deliver food all over Seoul, day and night. That's who I am now." "I didn't ask what you do," Hyunwoo said, taking a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I asked who you are." Minji took a deep breath, deciding that if she was going to die tonight, she would at least die with the truth on her lips. "I was the top student in computer science at Seoul National University 3 years ago. My parents died in a ferry accident when I was 19. I was raising my younger brother and supporting my grandmother. I had dreams of working for a tech company, of creating security systems that could protect people. Then my grandmother was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. My scholarship covered my tuition but not her medical bills. So I dropped out, started working 3 jobs, and eventually ended up delivering food because it paid slightly better than cleaning office buildings at night. I live in a single room in Gumho-dong with my grandmother, who needs constant care and medications we can barely afford. I'm nobody, Mr. Park. Just another ghost in this city trying to survive one more day." Hyunwoo stood motionless, his expression unreadable as he absorbed her story. The room remained silent, the experts holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen to this girl who had dared to speak so honestly to the most dangerous man in Seoul. Then Hyunwoo did something that sent shockwaves through the room. The corner of his mouth twitched upward. Not quite a smile. Hyunwoo Park hadn't truly smiled since he was a child, but close enough to make everyone who witnessed it feel as if the laws of nature had been temporarily suspended. "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., you will come to my office at Park Tower." "That is not a request." Minji stared at him, confusion written across her face. "For what? To deliver more noodles? Or to explain to more experts how I broke their unbreakable code?" "To show me what else you can do," Hyunwoo replied, his voice still cold but no longer threatening. "And to discuss how much you're worth to me." Minji picked up her delivery bag, slung it over her shoulder, and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she turned back to face him. "Fine, I'll come. But you owe me for those spilled noodles." They were my last delivery of the night, and that means I won't get paid for it. She walked out, leaving 25 experts and one crime lord staring after her in stunned silence. Hyun-woo watched her go, and for the first time in many years, he felt something stir inside his chest. Something unfamiliar. Something dangerous. In her tiny, cramped apartment in Gumho-dong, Min-ji pushed open the door as quietly as she could. The hinges creaked despite her efforts, and the sound echoed through the darkness like a warning. She stepped inside, not bothering to turn on the light. Illumination would only make the misery of her home more apparent. The apartment was nothing more than a single room, 12 square meters of space that served as bedroom, living room, and kitchen all at once. The wallpaper was stained with mold from years of humidity, the floor covered with cheap vinyl that curled at the edges, and the ceiling had water spots that grew larger with every rainy season. Yet this was all Min-ji could afford, even working 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. She tiptoed across the floor to check on her grandmother, who lay sleeping on a thin mattress in the corner. Grandmother Park's face was gaunt, her cheeks hollow, her skin yellowed from the cancer that was slowly consuming her body. Her breathing was labored, each inhale a struggle, each exhale a small victory in a war she was destined to lose without proper medical care. Min-ji knelt beside her, gently adjusting the thin blanket and smoothing back the wisps of gray hair from her grandmother's forehead. This woman had raised her after her parents died, had sacrificed everything to give Min-ji and her brother a chance at education. And now Min-ji was watching her die, inch by inch, because she couldn't afford the treatments that might save her. Min-ji moved to the small table in the corner where a stack of envelopes waited. Bills she was afraid to open. Medical notices with red stamps declaring final notice. Eviction warnings. And at the bottom, the worst one of all, a letter from her brother's school, informing her that his scholarship had been revoked due to declining grades and attendance. Her brother, once as brilliant as she was slipping away from her too, drawn into the street gangs that offered quick money and a sense of belonging she couldn't provide. She sat down, buried her face in her hands, and allowed herself 1 minute, just 60 seconds, to feel the crushing weight of her circumstances. 1 minute to remember the life she had once hoped for. 1 minute to acknowledge the fear that gnawed at her constantly. Fear that her grandmother would die, that her brother would be lost to the streets, that she would spend the rest of her life delivering food to people who wouldn't even remember her face. Then, as she had done every day since her parents died, she wiped away her tears and stood up. She had no right to break down, not when others were depending on her. The encounter with Hyun-woo Park replayed in her mind. She wasn't foolish enough to believe that his interest in her skills meant anything good. The Park Syndicate was notorious for using people until they were no longer useful, then discarding them like trash. Yet the money he could offer might be enough to save her grandmother, to pull her brother back from the edge, to give them all a chance at something better than mere survival. She looked at her hands, cracked and rough from the constant exposure to weather, as she raced her scooter through Seoul streets in all conditions. She had once used these hands to write elegant code, to create digital beauty from nothing but thoughts and logic. Now they were just tools for carrying food, for counting meager tips, for measuring out medication doses her grandmother couldn't afford to refill. Can you believe what's happening to Min-ji? If you've ever been underestimated in your life, hit that like button right now. We're only halfway through this incredible story. Comment below if you think Min-ji should trust Hyun-woo or not. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. The second half of the story will leave you speechless. The Park Tower stood in the heart of Gangnam like a monument to power and wealth. 60 floors of gleaming glass and steel that caught the morning light and reflected it back to the city below. Min-ji tilted her head back, squinting against the sun as she tried to see the top of the building. Her neck ached from the effort, a small reminder of how far she was from the world she was about to enter. She had spent the morning getting ready, washing her hair in cold water because the hot water in her building only worked for 2 hours each day, ironing her only decent shirt, a white button-up that was fraying at the collar but still looked presentable if you didn't look too closely. She had polished her worn shoes until they gleamed, trying to erase the scuffs from countless hours of riding her delivery scooter. As Minji stepped through the revolving doors into the vast lobby of Park Tower, she immediately felt out of place. The floor beneath her feet was marble imported from Italy, polished to such a high shine that she could see her reflection looking back at her. The walls were adorned with artwork that probably cost more than she would earn in 10 lifetimes. Everyone moving around her wore designer suits and dresses, carried expensive briefcases, and exuded the confidence that came with knowing they belonged. Minji approached the reception desk, where a security guard in an impeccable suit looked at her with thinly veiled contempt. "I have an appointment with Mr. Hyunwoo Park at 9 a.m., she said, forcing confidence into her voice while her heart raced. The guard smirked, looking her up and down as if she had just told the most ridiculous joke he'd ever heard. "You have an appointment with Mr. Park?" he repeated, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "And who exactly are you?" "Minji Park," she replied, standing straighter, refusing to be intimidated. The guard tapped at his computer, then shook his head. "Your name isn't on any list. Please leave before I call security." Minji was about to argue when a familiar voice spoke from behind her. "She's expected." Kim Ji-hoon stepped out of the elevator, his scarred face making the guard snap to attention like a soldier. "Mr. Park is waiting." The guard's eyes widened in shock, and he bowed deeply, stammering an apology. Minji followed Kim to a private elevator that required a special keycard to operate. As they ascended to the top floor, she could feel the weight of every gaze in the lobby following her, hear the whispers trailing in her wake. Who is she? Why is Kim personally escorting her? She looks like she just crawled out of the gutter. Minji pretended not to hear, but each whisper stung like a small cut. She had once been destined for places like this, had once believed her intelligence would open doors that her family's poverty had closed. Now she was an intruder, tolerated only because of the whim of a dangerous man. Hyunwoo Park's office occupied the entire top floor of the tower. It was unlike any space Minji had ever seen. Not an office so much as a kingdom perched above the clouds. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of Seoul, making it seem as though the entire city existed beneath Hyunwoo's feet. The furnishings were sparse but exquisite. A massive desk carved from a single slab of black walnut, a few leather chairs that looked soft as butter, and nothing else to distract from the breathtaking view. Hyunwoo himself stood with his back to her. Gazing out at the city, he controlled through both legitimate businesses and criminal enterprises. He turned as she entered, those cold eyes assessing her as if she were a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "You're on time," he said, his tone neutral. "I don't make a habit of wasting other people's time," Minji replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Even when that person could have me killed with a snap of his fingers." Hyunwoo's lips quirked slightly upward. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close enough to make Kim, standing guard by the door, blink in surprise. "Sit down," Hyunwoo said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "We have much to discuss." Minji sat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. She watched as Hyunwoo settled into his own chair, his movements graceful and controlled, like those of a predator at rest but never truly relaxed. "Last night," he began, his voice low and measured, "you did something that 25 of the best experts in the country couldn't do. I want to know how." Minji met his gaze directly. The encryption used a modified Fibonacci sequence as its base, but with a visual pattern overlay that most people wouldn't recognize unless they'd studied both cryptography and classical Korean art. The pattern was reminiscent of traditional Korean knot designs, endless knots without beginning or end. I recognized it because I did my undergraduate thesis on integrating traditional Korean art patterns into modern encryption algorithms. Hyunwoo leaned forward slightly, his interest visibly piqued. "And you saw this in 30 seconds? I've always been able to see patterns where others see only chaos," Minji said simply. "It's just how my brain works." Hyunwoo nodded slowly, then reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a tablet. He tapped it a few times, then slid it across the desk to her. "What do you see here?" Minji looked down at the screen, which displayed what appeared to be financial records. A complex web of transactions flowing through dozens of accounts. Most people would see only a jumble of numbers and dates. But Minji saw a story, pattern, a deception. "Someone is stealing from you," she said without looking up. Small amounts, siphoned through multiple accounts, always on the 15th of each month. The amounts vary slightly to avoid detection, but they always follow a mathematical sequence. Over 3 years, they've taken approximately 2.1 billion won. Hyun-woo's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. "How can you be certain?" Minji pointed to several entries on the screen. "The money always flows out through these accounts, but if you trace it back, it eventually lands here." She tapped on an account number, registered to a shell company in Singapore, which I'm guessing is owned by someone within your organization. Someone with access to your financial systems but not quite high enough to avoid leaving traces. Hyun-woo exchanged a look with Kim, who had moved closer during her explanation. Kim nodded once, confirming her assessment. "What would you suggest?" Hyun-woo asked, his voice dangerously soft. "Set a trap," Minji replied without hesitation. "Make a slightly larger transfer than usual on the 15th, but tag the funds with a digital tracker. When they move the money, you'll be able to follow it all the way to its final destination. Then you'll know exactly who's stealing from you and where they're keeping what they've already taken." Hyun-woo leaned back in his chair, studying her intently. "You have a valuable skill, Minji Park. A skill I'm willing to pay for. I want you to work for me. Not as a consultant or an employee, but directly for me. You'll report only to me, look at only what I ask you to look at, and tell no one what you discover." Minji's heart raced. This could be the opportunity that changed everything for her family. But she wasn't naive enough to believe it came without risk. "What would this job entail exactly?" she asked carefully. "You'll analyze our financial systems, identify vulnerabilities, find anyone who might be stealing or misappropriating funds. You'll help secure our digital operations against both internal and external threats. The salary will be 20 times what you make delivering food, plus full medical benefits for you and your family. 20 times her current salary. Enough to pay for her grandmother's treatments. Enough to move them all to a better apartment. Enough to get her brother back in school. It was everything she needed, offered by the last person she would ever want to work for. And if I refuse?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Hyun-woo's expression remained impassive. "Then you walk out of here and go back to delivering food in the rain. I won't harm you. Your knowledge of one encryption pattern is not worth the trouble of silencing you. But this offer expires the moment you leave this office. You'll never get another chance like this." Minji thought of her grandmother, growing weaker each day. Thought of her brother, slipping further into a world that would eventually destroy him. Thought of the tiny apartment with its mold-stained walls and broken heating. "I accept," she said finally. "But I have conditions." Hyun-woo raised an eyebrow, clearly unaccustomed to people placing conditions on his offers. "What conditions?" "My grandmother needs immediate medical treatment at the best cancer center in Seoul. My brother needs to be back in school with proper support to catch up on what he's missed. And I want a contract that specifies I will never be asked to do anything illegal. I'll help you find who's stealing from you, help you secure your systems, but I won't help you harm anyone or break any laws." For a long moment, Hyun-woo simply stared at her, his face unreadable. Then, to the visible shock of Kim still standing by the door, he laughed. It was a short, rusty sound, as if he had forgotten how to do it properly, but it was genuine. "Agreed," he said. "Your grandmother will be admitted to Seoul National University Hospital's Cancer Center today. Your brother will be enrolled in the top private academy in Gangnam with tutors to help him catch up. And you'll have your contract, specifying the legal boundaries of your work. Anything else?" Minji held his gaze. "Yes, you don't own me. You're buying my skills, not my soul. I work for you, but I'm not yours to command like a servant. I expect to be treated with respect. Hyunwoo's lips curved into what was almost a genuine smile. You have more courage than most men who've sat in that chair, Minji Park. Very well. Respect is earned, and you've already earned a measure of mine. Don't lose it. He extended his hand across the desk, and after a moment's hesitation, Minji shook it. His grip was firm but not crushing. His skin surprisingly warm for someone whose eyes were so cold. As their hands touched, something electric passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, that they were both people shaped by circumstances beyond their control, both fighting to maintain control in a world determined to take it from them. Minji knew she had just made a deal with the devil. But sometimes the devil was the only one offering terms you could live with. The transformation began immediately. Within hours of accepting Hyunwoo's offer, Minji's grandmother was transported by private ambulance to Seoul National University Hospital, where a team of oncologists was already reviewing her case and preparing a treatment plan. Minji's brother was pulled out of his public school and enrolled in Gangnam's most prestigious academy, complete with a dormitory room that was larger than their entire apartment. And Minji herself was given an office on the 49th floor of Park Tower, just below Hyunwoo's personal domain. The space was larger than any apartment she had ever lived in, with a desk of polished cherry wood, a leather chair that adjusted to her body, and a computer system more powerful than anything she had ever worked with, even during her university days. On her first day, she discovered 3 more security breaches in the Park financial network. On her second day, she identified the person stealing funds, Hyunwoo's own cousin, who had been skimming money for years, believing his family connection would protect him. Didn't. Minji never asked what happened to the cousin after Hyunwoo called him to a private meeting. Some questions were better left unasked in the world she now inhabited. By the end of her first week, Minji had completely overhauled the security protocols for all of Park Enterprises' digital operations. She worked long hours, often staying until midnight or later, absorbed in the familiar patterns of code and data that had once been her passion. Sometimes, late at night, Hyunwoo would bring food to her office. Not delivered noodles in plastic containers, but exquisite meals from the finest restaurants in Seoul, served on real china with proper silverware. They would eat together in silence, looking out at the city lights spreading below them like a galaxy of earthbound stars. Occasionally, Hyunwoo would ask her opinion on something unrelated to work, a book, a philosophical question, a piece of art. These conversations revealed glimpses of a different man beneath the cold exterior, a man who might have become something other than what he was if circumstances had been different. Minji found herself drawn to these glimpses, these momentary revelations of humanity in a man most people believed had none. She told herself it was mere curiosity, professional interest in a complex employer. But in the quiet moments when she was alone in her new apartment, a spacious 2-bedroom in one of Gangnam's most exclusive buildings, provided as part of her employment package, she admitted to herself that it was becoming something more dangerous. She was beginning to care for Hyunwoo Park, beginning to see past the monster to the man, beginning to understand the weight he carried as heir to an empire built on blood and fear. It was during her third week at Park Enterprises that Minji first encountered Soo-min Choi. She was working late, as usual, when the elevator doors opened and a woman stepped out, tall and elegant, with the kind of cold beauty that belonged on magazine covers. She wore a dress that probably cost more than Minji's yearly salary in her previous life, and diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists. "So you're the famous Minji," the woman said, her voice musical but with an edge like broken glass. "The delivery girl who solved the unsolvable puzzle. Hyunwoo has told me so much about you." Minji stood, instinctively straightening her posture. "And you are Soo-min Choi." The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Daughter of Jinho Choi and Hyunwoo's fiancé. Our families arranged our marriage when we were children. The wedding is in 3 months." The words hit Minji like physical blows. Fiancé, marriage, 3 months. She had known, of course, that Hyunwoo Park would have obligations, arrangements, connections appropriate to his status. But hearing it stated so baldly, Seeing the beautiful woman who would be his wife made the reality impossible to ignore. "It's nice to meet you," Minji managed to say, her voice surprisingly steady despite the sudden hollowness in her chest. Mr. Park never mentioned his engagement. Sumin's smile sharpened. "Didn't he? How strange. It's the talk of our world. The union of the Park and Choi families will create the most powerful alliance in Korean business. Or perhaps he simply didn't think it worth mentioning to an employee." The word employee carried a weight of dismissal, a reminder of Minji's place in the hierarchy. Before she could respond, the elevator doors opened again, and Hyun-woo himself stepped out. He paused, taking in the scene before him. Sumin standing like a beautiful predator, Minji rigid with tension. "Sumin," he said, his voice cooler than usual. "I didn't expect you." "Clearly," Sumin replied, moving to his side and placing a proprietary hand on his arm. "I thought I'd surprise you. Your secretary said you were still working, but I didn't realize you were occupied." "Minji is reviewing our security protocols," Hyun-woo said, his eyes meeting Minji's briefly. "It's important work." "I'm sure." Sumin smiled again, this time directing it at Hyun-woo. "But surely it can wait until tomorrow? Your mother has been calling about the wedding venue, and we need to make a decision." Minji watched as something like resignation passed across Hyun-woo's face. He was trapped, she realized. As much as she was by her circumstances, he was by his. The difference was that his golden cage was lined with power and wealth, while hers had always been bare and cold. "I should go," Minji said, gathering her things. "The analysis can wait until morning." Hyun-woo looked as if he wanted to object, but with Sumin clutching his arm, he merely nodded. "We'll continue tomorrow." Minji slipped past them to the elevator, feeling Sumin's cold gaze following her. As the doors closed, she caught a final glimpse of them. Hyun-woo's face impassive but his eyes troubled, Sumin's expression triumphant. Back in her apartment, Minji stood at the window, looking out at the city she had once navigated on her delivery scooter. A city that now seemed both closer and further away than ever. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and told herself that nothing had changed. Hyun-woo Park was still her employer, nothing more. His impending marriage was irrelevant to their professional relationship. But as she closed her eyes, she couldn't forget the look in his eyes when Sumin mentioned the wedding. Not happiness or anticipation, but something that looked almost like despair. The tension is building. If you're worried for Minji right now, hit that like button and share this video with someone who loves unexpected twists. Where do you think this story is heading? Drop your predictions in the comments below. Make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon activated because the conclusion to this story will change how you see the world. After learning about Hyun-woo's engagement, Minji did what she had always done when faced with painful realities. She buried herself in work. She arrived earlier each morning, stayed later each night, and focused so intently on her tasks that sometimes she forgot to eat or drink until her body demanded attention. She rebuilt the Park Enterprise's security systems from the ground up, creating encryption protocols so advanced that even she would have struggled to break them without inside knowledge. She designed monitoring systems that could detect even the smallest unauthorized access, the most subtle attempts at financial manipulation. And she maintained a careful, professional distance from Hyun-woo, speaking to him only about work, avoiding the late-night conversations that had begun to mean too much to her. If he noticed the change, he didn't mention it. But sometimes she would look up from her computer to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't, or wouldn't, decipher. Minji's grandmother improved steadily under the care of Seoul's best doctors. The aggressive cancer treatment was working, pushing back the disease that had been slowly claiming her life. Each time Minji visited, her grandmother seemed stronger, her eyes clearer, her smile more genuine. She never asked how Minji had suddenly acquired the means to afford such care. Some questions were better left unasked. Minji's brother thrived in his new school environment. Removed from the influences that had been dragging him down, given the support and resources he needed, his natural intelligence reasserted itself. His grades improved dramatically, and he began talking about university, about a future that extended beyond the next street corner or the next quick score. Minji should have been happy. Everything she had wanted for her family was becoming reality. Yet she felt hollow, as if she had traded a piece of herself for their security and wasn't sure the exchange had been worth it. One evening, about 2 months after she began working at Park Enterprises, Minji was reviewing security logs when she noticed something unusual. A pattern of access to certain financial files that didn't match any authorized user's behavior. It was subtle, almost invisible, but to Minji's pattern-trained mind, it stood out like a flare in the night. Someone was accessing Hyunwoo's personal financial records. Not taking anything, not changing anything, just looking, observing, gathering information. Minji traced the access back to its source and felt her blood run cold. The access was coming from within Park Tower, from the 48th floor, the office of Sumin Choi, who had been given space in the building to work on wedding preparations. Unsure what to do with this information, Minji decided to investigate further before bringing it to Hyunwoo's attention. She set up a monitoring system specifically targeted at Sumin's access, recording every file viewed, every search conducted. What she discovered was disturbing. Sumin wasn't just looking at financial records. She was compiling information about Hyunwoo's security protocols, his travel schedules, his most vulnerable business operations. And she was communicating regularly with someone outside the Park organization, someone whose digital footprint matched that of the Choi family's security chief. Minji was so absorbed in her investigation that she didn't hear the elevator doors open, didn't notice someone approaching until a shadow fell across her desk. She looked up to find Sumin standing there, beautiful and terrible in a blood-red dress, her eyes cold as winter. "Working late again?" Sumin asked, her voice like honey over broken glass. "You're so dedicated. Hyunwoo is lucky to have such a committed employee." Minji quickly minimized the screens showing her investigation, but from the narrowing of Sumin's eyes, she feared she hadn't been fast enough. "Just finishing some security updates," Minji replied, keeping her voice neutral. Sumin leaned closer, her perfume, expensive, suffocating, enveloping Minji like a cloud. "You know, I've been curious about something. A delivery girl who suddenly becomes a security expert for one of the largest conglomerates in Korea. It's quite the fairy tale. I was a computer science student before I was a delivery writer," Minji said, meeting Sumin's gaze directly. "Mr. Park recognized my skills and gave me an opportunity to use them." "How generous of him," Sumin smiled, the expression never reaching her eyes. "Hyunwoo has always had a soft spot for strays. But you should know something, Minji. In 3 weeks, he and I will be married. Our families will be united. And after the wedding, there will be changes, staff reorganization, budget reassessments, the usual adjustments that come with new management." The threat was unmistakable. Once Sumin was Hyunwoo's wife, Minji would be gone. "I serve at Mr. Park's pleasure," Minji said carefully. "If he decides my services are no longer required, I'll accept that decision." "So proper," Sumin laughed, the sound like breaking ice. "So professional. Tell me, do you practice that expression in the mirror? That perfect blend of competence and submission? Or does it come naturally to someone who's spent her life serving others?" Minji said nothing, refusing to rise to the bait. After a moment, Sumin straightened, adjusting her diamond bracelet with a casual flick of her wrist. "Enjoy your work while you can, delivery girl. Your time here is limited." She turned and walked away, her high heels clicking against the polished floor like a countdown. Minji waited until the elevator doors closed behind her, then immediately returned to her investigation. She needed to understand what Sumin was planning before she took her findings to Hyunwoo. She worked through the night, following digital trails, connecting patterns, building a picture of conspiracy that became clearer with each passing hour. By dawn, she had her answer, and it was worse than she had imagined. The Choi family, led by Sumin's father, was planning a takeover. Not a business takeover, but a bloody coup within the criminal underworld. They intended to use the wedding as cover to eliminate Hyunwoo and his key lieutenants, then absorb the park operations into their own. Sumin wasn't just complicit. She was instrumental to the plan, providing inside information, security details, schedules. Minji sat back, her eyes burning from hours of staring at screens, her heart heavy with the knowledge she now possessed. She had to tell Hyunwoo, had to show him the evidence, had to make him understand that the woman he was about to marry was plotting his death. She gathered her findings, organized them for clarity, and took the elevator to the 50th floor. It was barely 7 a.m., but she knew Hyunwoo would be there. He always arrived early before anyone else, to have an hour of solitude before the demands of the day began. The elevator opened directly into his office. Hyunwoo was standing by the window, his back to her, watching the sun rise over Seoul. He turned at the sound of the doors, and his expression softened almost imperceptibly when he saw her. A change so subtle that few would notice it, but Minji had learned to read the micro-expressions that were his only betrayal of emotion. "Minji," he said, his voice quieter than usual in the stillness of the early morning. "You're here early. I need to show you something," she replied, moving to his desk and laying out the evidence she had compiled. "It's about Sumin and the Choi family." Hyunwoo's face hardened, but he moved to join her, listening in silence as she explained what she had discovered. The unauthorized access, the information gathering, the communications with Choi's security chief, the pattern that pointed unmistakably toward betrayal and planned violence. When she finished, Hyunwoo was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the evidence before him but his mind clearly elsewhere. "You don't seem surprised," Minji said finally, studying his face. "I'm not," Hyunwoo admitted. "I've suspected the Choi family's intentions for some time. But suspicion is not proof, and moving against them without evidence would have triggered the very war I've been trying to avoid." "And now?" Minji asked. "Now that you have proof?" Hyunwoo looked at her, his gray eyes suddenly intense. "Now I do what I must to protect what's mine. The engagement will be broken. Preparations will be made. The Choi family will learn what happens to those who plot against the parks." Minji nodded, relief washing through her. But as she turned to leave, to let Hyunwoo make whatever calls were necessary to set his countermeasures in motion, he caught her wrist. His touch was gentle but firm, surprising her into stillness. "Why did you do this?" he asked softly. "Investigate Sumin? You could have ignored what you saw. It wasn't part of your assigned duties." Minji met his gaze directly. "Because you gave me and my family a chance when no one else would. Because you've treated me with respect. Because I couldn't stand by and watch while someone plotted to harm you, even if that someone is the woman you're supposed to marry." Hyunwoo's fingers tightened slightly around her wrist, and for a heartbeat, Minji thought he might pull her closer. But then his hand fell away, and the moment passed. "Thank you," he said simply. "Now go home and rest. You've done enough for today." Minji nodded and turned to leave, not trusting herself to say more. As the elevator doors closed between them, she saw Hyunwoo already reaching for his phone, his expression set with the cold determination that had made him feared throughout Seoul. What Minji didn't know, couldn't know, was that Sumin had already realized her access had been tracked. That even now, she was meeting with her cousin, Yong-hoon Choi, the most sadistic enforcer in the Choi family's employ. That they were already planning how to remove the troublesome delivery girl, who had somehow managed to uncover their carefully laid plans. Minji went home as Hyunwoo had instructed, showered away the exhaustion of her all-night investigation, and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When she woke, it was late afternoon, the sun already beginning its descent toward the horizon. She checked her phone and found several missed calls from a number she didn't recognize. As she was deciding whether to return the calls, a text message appeared on her screen. Unknown number, but the content made her blood run cold. "We have your brother. If you want to see him alive again, come to the old factory in Mullydong. Come alone. Tell no one. You have 1 hour." Attached was a photo of her brother, bound to a chair, his face bruised, his eyes wide with terror. Minji's hands shook as she stared at the image. Her first instinct was to call Hyun-woo, to ask for help. But the message was clear: come alone, tell no one. These were people who wouldn't hesitate to kill a teenage boy. She couldn't risk her brother's life. She dressed quickly in jeans and a dark hoodie, grabbed her keys and left her apartment. Instead of taking her car, a modest but new vehicle Hyun-woo had provided as part of her compensation, she went to the building's storage area and retrieved her old delivery scooter, which she had kept more out of sentimentality than necessity. The scooter would attract less attention in the industrial area around Mullydong, would let her slip through traffic and take shortcuts a car couldn't manage. And it connected her to who she had been before all this began. A girl fighting to survive, willing to do whatever it took to protect her family. The ride to Mullydong took 40 minutes, even with Minji weaving through traffic and taking every shortcut she knew. The old factory stood at the edge of the district, a hulking concrete structure abandoned years ago when manufacturing moved to cheaper locations overseas. Its windows were broken or boarded up, graffiti covered its exterior walls, and an air of desolation hung over it like a shroud. Minji parked her scooter a block away, not wanting to announce her arrival. She approached the factory cautiously, every sense alert for danger. The main entrance was chained shut, but a side door hung partially open, revealing darkness within. It was obviously a trap. Minji knew that, but what choice did she have? She slipped through the door into the dimness beyond. The interior of the factory was a vast open space, ceiling high above, broken machinery scattered across the concrete floor like the skeletons of prehistoric beasts. Dust motes danced in the shafts of late afternoon sunlight that penetrated through holes in the roof. "Hello," Minji called, her voice echoing in the emptiness. "I'm here. Let my brother go." Laughter answered her. A woman's laughter, familiar and chilling. Sumin stepped out from behind a pillar, elegant even in this desolate setting, her red dress a splash of color against the gray surroundings. "The loyal employee arrives right on schedule," Sumin said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "So predictable. So ordinary. Where is my brother?" Minji demanded, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Oh, he's not here." Sumin smiled, the expression never reaching her eyes. "He's safe at his school, completely unaware of any of this. The photo was from last month when my cousin had a little chat with him, just to establish our connection. Insurance, you might say." Minji felt cold fury rise within her. "You threatened a child to lure me here." "I did what was necessary," Sumin shrugged elegantly. "You interfered in matters beyond your understanding, beyond your station. Did you really think I wouldn't notice you investigating me? Wouldn't take precautions against exactly the kind of betrayal you committed this morning?" From the shadows behind Sumin emerged a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruelty etched into every line. Young-hoon Choi, the enforcer whose reputation for sadistic violence was whispered about even in the darkest corners of Seoul. "My cousin is very upset that his wedding might be cancelled," Young-hoon said, his voice surprisingly soft for a man of his size. "Family harmony is very important to us, Choice, so we need to remove the source of the disharmony." "You!" Minji took a step backward, eyes darting around the space, looking for an escape route. But Young-hoon moved with surprising speed for someone so large, closing the distance between them before she could run. "Don't worry," he said, his breath hot against her face as he gripped her arm hard enough to bruise. "I'm not going to kill you quickly. That would be too merciful. First, we need to have a conversation about exactly what you told Hyun-woo this morning." Minji knew in that moment that she was going to die, that this abandoned factory would become her tomb, that her brother and grandmother would never know what happened to her, that she would simply disappear, as so many did in the shadow world that existed beneath Seoul's gleaming surface. But she would not die begging, would not give Sumin and her cousin the satisfaction of seeing her break. "I told him everything," she said, lifting her chin defiantly despite the fear churning in her stomach. Every detail of your plan. Every betrayal you were planning. Every lie you've told him. He knows it all, and by now he's already moving against your family. Killing me won't change that. Sumin's beautiful face contorted with rage. You stupid, insignificant nothing. Do you think you matter? Do you think Hyunwoo Park cares whether you live or die? You were a novelty, a temporary amusement. Nothing more. If that's true, Minji replied, her voice steady despite Young-hoon's painful grip on her arm, then why are you so threatened by me? Sumin slapped her, the sound cracking through the empty factory like a gunshot. Minji's head snapped to the side from the force of the blow, and she tasted blood where her lip had split against her teeth. Take her to the back, Sumin ordered Young-hoon. Make her disappear. Make it hurt. Young-hoon grinned, a terrible sight that revealed teeth filed to points, a personal affectation that added to his fearsome reputation. He began dragging Minji toward the rear of the factory, where rusted machinery and deep shadows promised privacy for whatever horrors he had planned. Minji fought, kicking and struggling despite knowing it was useless against his superior strength. She would not go quietly to her death, would not give them the satisfaction of her submission. They were halfway across the factory floor when the sound of breaking glass shattered the silence. A figure crashed through one of the high windows, landing with cat-like grace on the concrete below. Hyunwoo Park stood there, his usual immaculate suit replaced by black tactical clothing, a gun in his hand and cold fury in his eyes. Behind him, more windows shattered as Kim and other members of the park security team entered. In seconds, the factory was filled with armed men, all focused on Sumin and Young-hoon. Let her go, Hyunwoo said, his voice deadly quiet as he leveled his gun at Young-hoon. Young-hoon froze, his grip on Minji still painfully tight. You're making a mistake, Park, he growled, choosing this nobody over an alliance with our family. The only mistake, Hyunwoo replied, taking a step closer, was believing the Choi family could be trusted. Let her go. For a moment, Minji thought Young-hoon would comply. But then she felt him shift, felt his arm move from her arm to her throat, felt something cold and sharp press against her skin. A knife, appearing from somewhere on his person. Back off, Park, Young-hoon called, using Minji as a shield. Or I'll open her throat right here. Minji could see Hyunwoo calculating, could see the cold strategy in his eyes as he assessed angles, distances, risks. She knew he was wondering if he could take the shot without hitting her. Knew he was weighing her life against his tactical advantage. But she wasn't helpless. Hadn't been helpless since the day her parents died and she'd been forced to become the protector, the provider, the survivor. While Young-hoon's attention was focused on Hyunwoo, Minji moved, a sharp backwards jab with her elbow into his solar plexus, followed by a stomp with the heel of her foot onto his instep. Young-hoon's grip loosened just enough for Minji to twist away, just enough for Hyunwoo to have a clear shot. The gunshot echoed through the factory like thunder, and Young-hoon fell, a neat hole in the center of his forehead, his knife clattering uselessly to the concrete floor. Sumin screamed, a sound of pure rage rather than grief or fear. She lunged toward Minji, hatred distorting her beautiful features into something monstrous. But before she could reach her target, Kim stepped forward and restrained her, his scarred hands efficient and impersonal as he subdued the struggling woman. Hyunwoo crossed the space between himself and Minji in long, quick strides. He reached her just as her legs gave way, catching her before she could fall, one arm around her waist supporting her weight while his free hand gently tilted her face up to examine her split lip, the bruise forming on her cheek. Are you hurt anywhere else? He asked, his voice low and tight with concern. Minji shook her head, suddenly unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The adrenaline that had kept her functioning was ebbing away, leaving her shaky and lightheaded. My brother, she managed finally. They threatened my brother. He's safe, Hyunwoo assured her. As soon as you left Park Tower this morning, I assigned security to both your brother and grandmother. They've been protected all day. Minji sagged against him in relief, no longer able to maintain the facade of strength that had carried her this far. Hyunwoo's arm tightened around her waist, supporting her without hesitation. "How did you find me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had Kim install tracking software on your phone months ago," Hyunwoo admitted. "A precaution. I've never used it until today, when you didn't answer my calls and your apartment was empty." Minji should have been angry at the invasion of privacy. Should have objected to being tracked without her knowledge or consent. But in this moment, with Jung-hoon's body cooling on the concrete nearby and the taste of her own blood in her mouth, she could only feel grateful. "Take me home," she said, closing her eyes briefly against the horror of the day. "Please." Hyunwoo nodded, then looked to Kim. "Deal with this," he ordered, gesturing to Jung-hoon's body and the still struggling Sumin. "Make sure the message to the Choi family is clear." Kim nodded once, his scarred face impassive as he handed Sumin off to another security team member. Minji didn't ask what would happen to her. Some questions were better left unasked in the world she now inhabited. Hyunwoo led Minji out of the factory, his arms still around her waist, supporting her when her legs threatened to give way. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. A black SUV waited nearby, engine running. As Hyunwoo helped her into the vehicle, Minji finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind since he crashed through the factory window. "Why did you come for me yourself? You could have sent Kim. Could have sent your entire security team. Why risk your own life?" Hyunwoo looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes revealing more emotion than she had ever seen in them. "Because some things cannot be delegated," he said finally. "Because some people are too important to entrust to anyone else's care." He reached out, his fingers gentle as they brushed a strand of hair from her face, careful to avoid the bruise blooming on her cheek. "Because I could not bear the thought of a world without you in it, Minji Park." The words hung between them, an admission neither had expected. Minji looked at this man, this dangerous, powerful man who commanded an empire built on both legitimate business and shadowy dealings, and saw not the cold crime lord, but the human being beneath. The man who had recognized her value when no one else would. The man who had just risked everything to save her. "I was afraid I'd never see you again," she admitted, her voice small but steady. "Afraid I'd die without telling you." "Telling me what?" Hyunwoo prompted when she faltered. "That you changed my life. That you saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. That somewhere between that first night and today, Minji stopped, uncertain whether she should cross this final line. Hyunwoo's hand moved to cup her face, his touch impossibly gentle for someone capable of such violence. "Say it," he urged, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to hear you say it." "I fell in love with you," Minji confessed, the words both a relief and a terror to speak aloud. "Even knowing who you are, even knowing what you've done, even knowing I shouldn't." For the first time since she had known him, Hyunwoo smiled. A real smile that transformed his face, softened the hard lines, reached his eyes and warmed them. "Then we are both guilty of the same crime," he said. "Because I have loved you since the moment you solved a puzzle 25 experts couldn't crack, and then dared to tell me I owed you for spilled noodles." He leaned forward, hesitating just a breath away from her lips, giving her a chance to pull away if she wanted to. Minji didn't. She closed the distance between them, kissing him despite her split lip, despite the pain, despite everything that should have kept them apart. In that moment, Minji understood that her life had changed irrevocably, that there was no going back to who she had been before, that her path forward would not be easy or simple or safe, but it would be with him, and somehow that made all the difference. 6 months later, Minji stood in the chairman's office of the newly renamed Park Technology Group, looking out over Seoul as the city lights began to twinkle in the early evening. The company had undergone a dramatic transformation, divesting from shadowy enterprises, investing heavily in legitimate technology businesses, rebuilding its reputation as a leader in cybersecurity rather than a feared name in the underworld. Minji herself had changed too. Gone was the delivery girl in worn clothes, replaced by a confident woman in a tailored suit, her hair styled, her posture straight, her eyes clear and focused. As Chief Security Officer of Park Technology Group, she commanded respect from the same people who had once looked through her as if she were invisible. The door opened behind her, and Minji turned to see Hyunwoo entering, his expression softening as it always did when he looked at her. He crossed the room to join her at the window, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. "The Choi situation is finally resolved," he said, his voice carrying notes of both satisfaction and weariness. "Their operations have been dismantled, their allies have switched allegiance to us, and what remains of their family has fled to China." Minji nodded. The past 6 months had been a dangerous time, with the conflict between the Park and Choi families escalating into open warfare before finally being resolved in Hyunwoo's favor. Throughout it all, Minji had been by his side, helping to guide the transformation of his empire from criminality to legitimacy. "And your grandmother's latest tests?" Hyunwoo asked, his hand finding hers, fingers intertwining naturally, comfortably. "Cancer-free," Minji smiled, still hardly able to believe it herself. "The doctors say her recovery is remarkable. And my brother has been accepted to Seoul National University's computer science program. Full scholarship." Hyunwoo squeezed her hand gently. "They're thriving because of you. Because you never gave up on them, even when everything was against you. Because you gave me a chance," Minji corrected. "Because you saw something in a soaking wet delivery girl that no one else bothered to look for." Hyunwoo turned to face her fully, his gray eyes, once so cold, now warm with an emotion that still amazed Minji every time she saw it directed at her. "I saw brilliance," he said simply. "I saw courage. I saw someone who refused to be defined by her circumstances. How could I not fall in love with that?" Minji rose on her toes to kiss him, no longer surprised by the tenderness with which he responded, by the gentle way his hands cradled her face as if she were something precious, irreplaceable. When they parted, Hyunwoo reached into his pocket and withdrew a small black box. "I had planned to do this somewhere more romantic," he said, a rare hint of nervousness in his voice. "But I find I cannot wait any longer." He opened the box to reveal a ring, not ostentatiously large or flashy as one might expect from a man of his wealth, but elegantly simple. A perfect diamond set in platinum that caught the city lights and reflected them like stars. "Minji Park," Hyunwoo said, his voice steady despite the emotion visible in his eyes. "You changed everything. You showed me a different path. You made me want to be worthy of you. Will you marry me?" Minji looked at the man before her. No longer just the feared crime lord, but a complex human being working to redeem himself, to build something better, to leave behind a different legacy than the one he had inherited. She thought of their journey from that first night when she had delivered noodles to a room full of experts, to this moment, standing 50 floors above Seoul with the city at their feet. "Yes," she said, the word simple but carrying the weight of everything they had overcome to reach this point. "Yes, I will marry you." As Hyunwoo slipped the ring onto her finger, Minji thought about patterns. How her life had followed one pattern until the night she delivered food to Park Tower, and how everything had changed in 30 seconds because she had seen a different pattern where others saw only chaos. How sometimes the most important pattern of all was the one that connected two unlikely people across all the barriers of class and circumstance and expectation. 6 years later, Minji stood in the sunshine outside the Seoul Hope Foundation, watching as a group of students, bright young minds from the poorest neighborhoods in the city, filed into the building for their advanced coding class. The foundation, established with Hyunwoo's money but guided by Minji's vision, provided education, opportunities, and support to children and young adults from disadvantaged backgrounds. Beside her, Hyunwoo watched the students with quiet satisfaction. The years had softened him, had eased some of the hard edges that life had carved into him. He was still powerful, still commanding, but the coldness that had once defined him had been replaced by a measured warmth, a capacity for compassion that few would have believed possible in the man he had once been. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Minji asked, slipping her hand into his, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the years. "I threatened to have you killed for touching a computer without permission," Hyunwoo replied, a rare smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Not my finest moment." Minji laughed, the sound bright in the morning air. "And I spilled noodles all over an expensive carpet and told you that you owed me for my missed delivery fee. You were never afraid of me," Hyunwoo mused, his thumb tracing idle patterns on the back of her hand. "Even when you should have been." "I was terrified," Minji corrected. "But I learned long ago that showing fear only makes you more vulnerable. And I had too many people depending on me to be vulnerable." Hyunwoo brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles where a simple platinum band now rested alongside her engagement ring. "You saved me," he said quietly. "Not just from the Choi family's betrayal, but from myself. From the man I was becoming." "We saved each other," Minji replied, leaning against his shoulder for a moment. "That's what love is supposed to do." They stood together, watching as the last of the students entered the foundation building. Young people whose lives would be irrevocably changed by the opportunities they were being given, just as Minji's life had been changed that rainy night when she delivered noodles to a room full of experts and solved in 30 seconds what they couldn't solve in a week. This story of how a simple delivery girl changed a criminal empire forever reminds us that brilliance can be found in the most unexpected places. Has anyone ever underestimated you? Share your story in the comments below. If Minji's journey from delivering noodles to transforming an entire empire touched your heart, please hit that like button right now. Subscribe and turn on all notifications